When a man chasing the American dream accidentally commits a murder, he tries to escape his past by changing his identity again and again and again. Richmon Gruber, a smart, handsome, and ambitious young man, grows up poor, but his days are rich with American television. On his 24th birthday, he packs his bags and flies to the United States to pursue the American dream. Gruber's tourist visa allows him to stay in the country for just 2 months, but he wants to stay for good. He meets a local student, Virginia Potts, at the campus library. Gruber introduces himself.
I'm Richmond, by the way.
Virginia.
1 month and 29 days later, they marry. Richmond borrows money from Virginia and enrolls as a freshman at the college. Richmond, a finance major, and Virginia, a biology major, are volunteers for a nonprofit organization to protect the endangered American wolf. Richmond is the campus treasurer. But all is not as it seems. While working in the library, Richmond is approached by the group's campus president, Don Spicer. Don tells Richmond that withdrawals of over $10,000 have been made from the group's account and are not backed up by expenses. Don accuses Richmond of stealing the money. Richmond denies the allegations. Don resolves to let the police decide Richmond's fate.
Wait, President Spicer, wait!
Richmond grabs his money box and smashes it over Don's head, cracking his skull. Richmond is shocked by his actions, but soon realizes that he's dead.
Talk about your bad turn of events. This was a robbery that kind of turned into a murder, and once you've committed murder, there's no going back.
He props up Don's body at a library desk and surrounds him with books. To any passers-by, it would appear that Don fell asleep studying.
Richmond isn't trying to hide the body. He's just trying to buy himself some time.
He then returns to his room, cleans up the evidence, packs his bags, and leaves town. On his way out of the dorm, he sends a text message to his wife and then throws away his phone. With the money he stole, he pays cash for a bus ticket west.
While Richmond is technically a fugitive, he's given authorities no reason to suspect him of anything. He just looks like a bum who's left his wife, and he's left no evidence.
Richmond, who spent thousands of hours watching American TV in the 90s, has arrived at the center of the entertainment industry.
Hi, I'm Rich Roberts.
He loses his German accent and begins introducing himself as Rich Roberts, an ex-Harvard law student who dropped out to pursue screenwriting. Rich applies for an entry-level job in the mailroom of a talent agency. The mailroom job pays barely above minimum wage, and Rich is quickly burning through the money he stole. Eyeing a way out, at a work event, he meets a divorced 51-year-old veteran screenwriter, Denise Hawkins, and charms his way into her bed. He tells her all about his law school days and his childhood in rural Pennsylvania, including being pen pals with Francis Ford Coppola. Denise tells everyone that the talented young artist is simply renting a room at her house.
Mom, I'm home!
But her own son, John, suspects otherwise. John, a military intelligence officer in the Marines, has just arrived home for 2 weeks' leave, and he's not a fan of his mother's new house guest. He senses something flimsy about Rich's charming stories. His first night home, when John hears Rich sneak into his mother's bedroom, he becomes determined to stop the affair. He rifles through Rich's belongings and takes his tourist visa. He finds a journal with handwriting in German on some pages. John drops the notebook on top of the bag and leaves armed with information to confront this so-called Rich Roberts.
John isn't afraid of any confrontation, which is why when Rich returns to his room, he finds his bag unzipped and his notebook open.
John is having breakfast when Rich walks in and says hello to him in German.
Guten Morgen.
Rich nonchalantly tells John that he studied abroad in Germany and fell in love with the language. But when John pulls out Rich's original German tourist visa, Rich stops smiling. Rich invites John to the backyard to try and smooth things out by talking guns and drinking beer. John seems hesitant but likes guns and beer too much. Rich drops a sleeping drug in his drink, and John passes out on the spot. In Denise's basement, Rich pulls out a chainsaw and does his best Leatherface impression. John, passed out from the Rohypnol in his drink, is asleep on the floor. Rich takes him apart.
He'd already killed once, so he was willing to kill again. But in order to keep the ruse going, he had to eliminate evidence. What the genius didn't know is that when you use a chainsaw, you splatter blood and flesh on the floor, the walls, even the ceiling. While trying to eliminate evidence, he multiplied it 1,000 times.
After Rich has murdered John, he works at a furious pace to thoroughly clean up the basement and bury John's mutilated body in the backyard. The next morning, Rich is making breakfast for a hungover Denise. She wonders where her son John is. Rich informs her that after going out last night, John received a top-secret directive from the Marines and had to leave right away. Almost a year has passed, and John Hawkins has not returned to his mother Denise like Rich told her he would. Rich has one more loose end to tie up. First, he quits his job and doesn't answer any more calls, texts, or emails. He plans to poison Denise by tainting her drink. Denise is at home drinking alone as usual. At this point, she has no idea what drink she's on. She starts to feel a little queasy and heads to the bathroom to throw up. She mistakenly slips and hits her head on the hard porcelain rim and passes away. Rich suddenly realizes his job is done here and slowly walks away. Rich decides to take off in John's new car. Meanwhile, a reality TV house flipping show is filming a renovation of Denise Hawkins' home. The owner decides that he wants to install a brand new pool. During the renovation, he discovers the remains of a mutilated body.
Denise and her son John are the two roads that will take us to the true identity of Rich Roberts. But they're both dead. So we're left with no leads, no evidence, nothing that will tell us that Rich Roberts killed John and Denise.
The murderer Shapeshifter, formerly known as Richmon Gruber, then Rich Roberts, has now taken the identity of a high-roller professional poker player, Richard Regal.
John Hawkins' abandoned car is found in the outskirts of Las Vegas. Authorities determined then that Rich Roberts is a person of interest in his disappearance. An all-points bulletin for Rich Roberts goes out to the Las Vegas police and all the regional authorities.
Investigators find Richard's address and are surprised to discover that such a popular high roller actually lives on the outskirts of town. They break in, but he's gone without a trace. 1 month later, Rich Regal has relocated and is now masquerading as Rick Kennedy. He claims to be a distant relative of the famed Kennedy clan. Rick meets and quickly proposes to a real estate mogul, Kelly Davis. Rick convinces Kelly to elope. He doesn't provide Kelly with much detail besides that most of his relatives have died or are too busy to attend a wedding. Kelly asks Rick to join her real estate empire. He does surprisingly well, and the empire grows. Kelly gives birth to a son, Ricky. Rick leads a great life, making lots of money, but he doesn't know how to manage his good fortune and spends recklessly. Kelly hires a private investigator. The PIs uncover some troubling details about Rick. One, he is not related to the Kennedys. He has never been to Harvard. And finally, he misappropriates funds, manipulates earnings, and writes off false expenses at Kelly's real estate agency. In a letter, Kelly has laid out the grounds for a divorce. She says she intends to get full custody of Ricky and has decided to relocate to London, England.
But it could have been worse. Kelly could have had him busted for a whole bunch of things, even though she didn't know the cold, hard truth about his past. And now, Rick can't even fight for custody of his son, because when you do that, you're giving people permission to look into your background. And if you looked into Rick's background, what would you find? Murder.
He spirals into a year-long depression.
At this point, Rick is at his most vulnerable point. Sociopaths never care about anything, and they don't know what to do when they do.
On a visit to Phoenix, Rick is ecstatic to see his son, even though a court supervisor is present. The two spend the afternoon playing sports and having a great time. But when Ricky Jr. is set to leave, Rick tells the court supervisor he needs to move something in the front seat. It's another ruse. Rick punches the supervisor and jumps into the driver's seat himself. When the supervisor comes around, he realizes Rick and Ricky are gone and immediately calls the police, who issue an Amber Alert.
Rick couldn't tie up this loose end, and his court supervisor was able to provide the car description, the license number, and most importantly, the identity of the kidnapper.
Rick doesn't get far. While getting gas, he is recognized immediately and arrested without incident. While Rick is in custody, investigators make some shocking discoveries. His fingerprints match that of a Richmon Gruber in Kentucky, tying him to the murder of a college administrator, Don Spicer. Police also match him as the missing suspect in the murder of John Hawkins over 7 years ago. The authorities charge the shapeshifter, known as Rick Kennedy, for kidnapping and aggravated assault, Richard Regal for using a false name and information used for criminal intent, Rich Roberts for murder, and Richmon Gruber for murder. He is sentenced to life in prison.
After years and years, the man originally known as Richmon Gruber is finally taken down for dozens and dozens and dozens of crimes. If it hadn't been for wanting to be with his son, he'd still be out there. Maybe not as rich, but he'd be free. Ironically, it was humanity that brought an inhuman shapeshifter to justice.